Un grand merci pour ces mots. C'était très, très gentil. Peut-être trop gentil. Recteur Philippe Dubois, merci infiniment pour ce privilège immense, une université très, très distinguée, avec un futur très fort. Mais en même temps, je vous prie de rester calme parce que je vais utiliser ma langue maternelle, anglais. I wanted to, of course, as I've said in my very bad French, to thank this university for the great honor. It's a very special occasion, a moving occasion, and I'm very proud to be here at this university. It also means a great deal to me to be in the company of my friend Nicolas Hulot, a friend for more than a decade, someone whose contributions I admire enormously in terms of his thinking and his extraordinary ability to communicate. And communication is at the heart of action here. I have not yet met Greta Thunberg. I've sat in the General Assembly of the United Nations less than 2 weeks ago and listened to her. And she is an extraordinarily powerful person, powerful in the best sense, powerful, good sense of the word. And so it's a great privilege to be in her company also. She is an inspiration, and you see it in our own students. So to be here with Nicolas, to be here indirectly with Greta is a special part of the honor. Now, I want to do two things academically. We're a university, I'm an academic, so let me do two things. One is to look back at what I've learned since the Stern Review 13 years ago, and the other is to look forward about what we can do and what we should do. I hope those two things are related. So looking back, I said that the costs of action are much less than the costs of inaction. And many people said I was alarmist about the costs of inaction. I actually understated the case. The costs of inaction, the dangers of climate change, which I and others argued, based on the science 13 years ago, were very, very worrying, extremely worrying then. They have become still more worrying in the time that's gone since then. Every report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they've been reporting since 1988, has become more worrying than the previous one. The scientists have done their best to be conservative, so each time they review their past contributions, they recognize that they were too conservative, that the problems are bigger than they thought. That's happened every time since 1988 that they've returned to look at this problem. This is much more worrying. So I argued it was very worrying 13 years ago, but I underestimated that story. The Western Antarctic ice sheet is probably destabilized already. The Amazon forest has a tipping point where it starts to switch over to savanna, the whole thing. A tipping point somewhere between 20 and 40% of loss. We don't know exactly where. It's already close to 20% of loss. We are very close to tipping points. That would be irreversible. You will see in a few minutes that I think there's so much that we can do to tackle and address this problem. But the science is still more worrying 13 years on. On the other hand, the technology has changed remarkably. The Stern Review was published 1 year before the iPhone. The economists have this sort of rather charming story often in statistics that if A happens before B, then A caused B. Now, I'm not arguing that the Stern Review caused the iPhone, but it was 1 year before the iPhone. Imagine what we can do now in managing energy systems, transport systems, cities, forests, land, through the enormous power of data, observation, artificial intelligence. We are in a much better position to act than we were before. Look what has happened to materials around, in so many ways, insulation, transport of electricity, making different kinds of energy storage and so on. It's been transformed. The cost of storage has come down almost at the same pace as the cost of solar and wind. The technology has been absolutely remarkable, much faster than we anticipated then. And that's been on the back of very modest, in fact, not very good policies, but at least policies in the right direction. Imagine how fast it could change if we made our policies clear and strong. So the technology is extraordinary. That's the second dimension. The third dimension is the political will. Now, strong action, radical change requires political will. Political will requires understanding. That's why it's so important that we do our analysis. We work as scientists and economists, and we have great communicators like Nicolas and Greta. That's part of creating political will, and it has moved, but it hasn't moved fast enough, and of course it depends where you look. But I've been working in India for 45 years. I've been working in China for more than 30 years. And those countries have changed their position, changed their understanding, changed of the problem, and changed their understanding of what can happen, changed their view of their role in the world remarkably over the last 5 or 10 years. They're still, China's emissions have probably plateaued, India's are still rising, but this is a story of change in the biggest countries of the world. The story in Africa is changing too. So we have a much deeper understanding, but every time I start to sound optimistic, please finish the sentence, or I say things are happening, please add at the end of the sentence, not fast enough. So we can see the momentum, we can see the good things, but nowhere near fast enough. Now we've seen I won't say the name, but the current occupant of the White House has not been helpful in this story. But there's another America. There are many more Americas. They're the cities and the states and the firms and so on. They're changing too. So there is momentum to build on. In many ways, businesses are out ahead of governments. So there is so much we can build on, but time is absolutely precious. And let me now go to the second part, which I'll do quickly. What do we have to do to act quickly? Well, the first thing we have to do is understand the urgency and scale. Just for 2 degrees centigrade, and we should really be heading for 1.5 degrees, given the report of the IPCC of a year ago. The difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees is very big. It's that, for example, we lose all our coral in 2 degrees. We just lose most of it at 1.5. The length of droughts would be twice as long, more than twice as long, under 2 degrees than 1.5 degrees. The fraction of the population exposed to extreme heat for long periods would more than double in the difference between 1.5 and 2. It's a very serious difference. But even if our target was just 2 degrees, in the next 20 years, we'd have to reduce emissions by at least 40%. In the next, over 20 years, we'd have to reduce emissions by at least 40%, just for 2 degrees. In the next 20 years, the world economy will probably roughly double. If that will be growth of 5-6% probably in Asia and elsewhere, 1 or 2% in other countries. Average 3% doubles in 2 decades. So the new economy that appears in 20 years, if that was zero carbon, that wouldn't be anywhere near enough. We've got to reduce by 40% in 20 years, just for 2 degrees. This is an extraordinarily rapid change that we have to make. Now, that argument is extremely simple. It says double in 20 years, reduced by at least 40% in 20 years for 2 degrees. Essentially only 2 numbers there. One is arithmetic, the other is the science. And people look at you and they say, yes, thank you, Nick, that was very clear. and they go on as if you said nothing. It's extremely important, and this is the first task that I want to underline, is that urgency and scale, how close we are to tipping points, is not yet clearly understood, and that's of fundamental importance. The second thing is that we have in our hands an extraordinarily attractive new way of increasing our living standards in the world. We can create cities where you can move and breathe and be productive. That sounds like a good idea, even if you've never heard of climate change. We can rebuild our ecosystems so that they are robust and fruitful. We can restore degraded land. We can improve our forests. We can do much less damage. Indeed, we can do good through the way we grow our food rather than do damage through the way we grow our food. There's so much that we can do that's in our hands. We can have zero carbon electricity. We know how to do it. We can have transport systems that run on zero carbon electricity. So if you look at power, if you look at transport, if you look at the way we heat our buildings, we know how to do these changes now. We've learned a lot, and we're going to learn so much more as we embark on that story. Now we're going to have to invest. We're going to have to innovate. We probably have to invest another couple of % of world GDP. That's fine. These are really good investments with very powerful returns. And we should do that in a world which actually is demand constrained. Demand is not strong enough. It will boost the growth. This is the growth story. Now, I don't want to pretend it's easy because it's the growth story, because this is a new kind of growth. It's a non-damaging growth. It requires change. It requires investment. It requires the management of dislocation. But it is an enormously attractive path. And if we can show how that's done, there are more and more examples. If we can make the analytical case, produce the examples, then I firmly believe that we can take this great opportunity. So in the words of Barack Obama, yes, we can. But there's a huge question of whether we will. So I'm very optimistic about what we can do. I worry deeply about what we will do. But that's up to us. That's in our hands. Those are the decisions we have to make. Those are the arguments we have to communicate. That's what we have to teach. And my goodness, now we're really learning from our students. The students that come to us now have spent 10 or 15 years in school understanding this. Greta just said she learnt it from age 8. But the generation that came through 15 years ago didn't have this. The current generation do have it. They understand it. They understand the importance. They're insisting that we act. They're right to do so. And we're privileged to have such young people with us. Thank you very much.